Hello everybody and welcome! In this episode of the Whirligig World series we are going to examine the inner system of Mezbin just a little bit more before expanding out. You may know this probe from the last episode. This is the M1S2 Hawk. We have to complete two contracts with it. The first is just a simple orbital correction. We have to complete it first, which should be easy since the Hawk must be in almost a perfect circular orbit with an inclination of 40 degrees. Then we can go to the second one, which is almost the same, except we have to put the satellite into an orbit with a 0.42 eccentricity and the inclination must be at least 52 degrees. At the same time, we have to collect magnetometer and radioplasma wave scans both from high and low orbits around Thresomin. Then it must stay in orbit around the Moon for 187 days. Because the satellite is quite outdated, since its launch a bunch of new scientific instruments were developed, I decided when its mission is over, I will crash it into Thresomin or into Mezbin. Everything is depending on the remaining amount of delta V. We will do this so we will not leave any trash around the Moon and we can send newer probes with better instruments as well. Anyway, let's just jump into the next mission with the launch of M1S2 Phobos M2 spaceship with its satellite companion. This spacecraft may also be familiar to you from the previous video, because its first iteration went to the highlands of Thresomin. In this mission we will go to the lowlands. But before landing we have to launch the resource mapping probe. For the best results we have to put the satellite into a polar orbit around the Moon. Later then we can create a map of Thresomin with the locations of the ore deposits. The instrument which will scan the surface must be at least 5000 meters, so we have to adjust its orbit accordingly. Then, with the resource map in our hands, we can locate the ideal location for our future mining base. Meanwhile, with the landing module we are slowly getting closer to the surface. We need more experienced engineers in the future, that's why for this mission I chose Bill with Starson Kerman as the crew. We need Bill to get more experience because he will play an important role in the future. After collecting the surface sample and the EVA report, we just have to plant a flag to complete the mission. To get back to Mezbin, we will use the same technique as before. After escaping the sphere of influence of Thresomin, we have to drop our orbit just below Statmons, then we can launch the same towing ship that we used before. I did not change anything on that because it's a reliable ship and the spin after launch became its hallmark. The docking and the landing went just fine without any problems, but I have to remind myself, and you as well, that I installed the dang it mode earlier, which can cause unexpected surprises along the way. For the next launch we will use a different iteration of M1S2 Phobos M2. The administration asked us to bring Dellar Kerman with us. She's a scientist and she has to conduct a couple of experiments at the location of Scott's Ave. The landing site is marked with that orange alembic icon. After a successful landing, science collecting and flag planting, we can leave the surface of Thresomin behind and heading back to Mezbin. This was the first time I tried to land the ship as close to the KSC as possible. As you may know, the closer you land to the KSC, the more fun you will get at the end. I probably messed up my inclination earlier, so I ended up just a little bit north from the base. Meanwhile, we got a resource scan of Thresomin. You can see that purple line at the bottom. It means the deposit is located at the southern pole of the Moon. There we should find ore in the highest concentration. Later I would like to fine-tune the mapping instrument. Maybe we will find a new deposit around the equator. That way the delta V requirements for the transfer vessel from the surface to equatorial orbit should be a bit lower, so we can refuel various spacecraft without the need for landing. And now we are getting a bit further from Mezbin with the launch of the M1S3 Grotto 1 satellite. Yes, we are starting to explore the third satellite of our home planet. This will be Graymun. And as you can see from the perspective of Mezbin, we are approaching Graymun from the inside. It's quite a dangerous maneuver because the sphere of influence of the Moon is tiny compared to Kerbin's Mun. So if you don't have the required amount of delta V to reduce your speed compared to Graymun, it will crash into you. Or you will crash into it. Or you get it. We sent this little tiny probe for mapping resources, and maybe we will build a refueling base there as well. For this, as we did around Thresomin, we have to increase the inclination of our orbit around Graymun for the best results. And finally, we are sending the M1S3 Grotto 2, which carries a ton of scientific instruments. In fact, it carries every instrument we have developed so far to maximize the scientific data we can get. And as you can see, it has its own landing legs. That's because we started the satellite program of Graymun. It means we have to land on 3 different biomes. In theory, it should not be a problem, since Graymun has at least 10 of them. So the only limitation should be the amount of delta V we have. And as you can see, this time we are approaching Graymun from the outside, let's say. Again, in theory, this should be a bit safer, since this way you have a bit less chance to crash into the surface. However, we spent about 1700 meters per second of delta V just to get into orbit around Graymun. So probably the best way to approach it would be the same as we got to Thresomin to minimize the speed difference between the Moon and our spacecraft. Finally, we are started our descent toward the surface. The first landing site, which is located below us, is the Mare Remotis. As you can see, the Moon has several of these seas, since Mare means sea in Latin. So probably Graymun's past was as violent as our moons. After a soft landing, we have a confirmation for the first biome. So after we collected as much scientific data as we can and send them back home, we are heading to the next one, which appears to be north from us, the Midlands. From here we gathered as much scientific data again as just possible and have to send them back home. So 2 out of 3 biomes just registered. The flight toward the last landing site, which should have been the another sea just north from us, was messed up a little bit and we burnt a bit more fuel than what we should. That way we arrived at Orientis Mare. And well, yeah, we ran out of fuel. So I had to use what we had. And luckily the magnetometer boom from D-Magic was just sturdy enough to save the probe. For now. Because right now we are flying about 10 meters from the surface with a speed of more than 100 meters per second. And despite all the efforts, I tried to save Grotto 2 in vain. collected all and sent back as much scientific data as I could, but the probe couldn't avoid its fate and crash into the surface. But at least the third landing site or third landing was confirmed, so the contract was completed. And what you see on the screen right now is the sneak peek from the next video, where we will expand the infrastructure around Thresomin, but it will be in the next video. I really hope you liked this video. If yes, then please like it, and I really like to see your comments as well, and see you next time.